Introduction: The New Dawn. Humanity is poised at the beginning of a wondrous experience. We are graduating to a new way of life. We are awakening to our vast creative potential. While there is a promise of a new golden age, getting there will be a bit rocky. We are in the midst of the earth changes, and they will continue to intensify and accelerate. Not everyone is going to make it through intact. In fact, a lot of souls will be leaving the earth over the next 20 to 30 years. Although this might look like a tragedy from a third density perspective, from the higher realms it is a perfect unfolding of the divine plan. Every soul ultimately manifests its true desires. Young souls often feel the desire to experience war, poverty, pain and suffering, and may choose to leave the earth through debilitating illness, starvation, or natural or man-made disaster. It is important not to judge the decisions of young souls. The soul does not consider things to be good or bad. It wants to experience everything there is in the lower planes. As the soul evolves, he or she will eventually become weary of experiencing the more negative things and will seek out lifetimes of peace, prosperity, joy, love and compassion. Many older souls come to Earth to help the younger souls grow and evolve. In order to do this, the older souls must refamiliarize themselves with things learned in past lifetimes in order to relate to the younger souls. Put another way, it is difficult to communicate with someone about grief if you have not recently experienced it yourself. The goal, therefore, of many of the more advanced souls is to immerse themselves just enough to be one with suffering humanity, but not so much as to become enmeshed in the drama and forget who they are. The graduation. The entire Earth is graduating. She is shifting from a predominantly third-dimensional to a fourth-dimensional planet. Consequently, humanity is graduating from a third density to a fourth density vibration. All life forms living upon and within the Earth must make this shift in order to remain here. Note: the words density and dimension are sometimes used interchangeably. However, strictly speaking, density refers to a specific level of vibration of a life form, while dimension refers to a plane of existence, which may or may not be the same as the life forms vibrating within it. A complete description of density and dimension is given in this author's first book, Life on the Cutting Edge, 2nd edition. In order for human beings to grow and evolve into higher states, a lot of purging and purification is necessary. This is what we are seeing today in the world. It is stated in many religious texts that there will be a time of judgment, or sorting the wheat from the chaff. This is not really a judgment by some supreme being, but rather, a process of deciding whether or not one is ready to move forward into the new earth. In order to move ahead and become part of the new golden age, you must let go of all that is no longer serving you, including false and limiting belief systems, emotional pain, subconscious and unconscious attitudes and conditioning, prejudices, habits, and ways of thinking and feeling that are holding you back from awakening to your higher nature. If your soul wants you to grow and evolve, and you are not listening and have become distracted by the myriad of detours offered everywhere you turn, then your soul will gently nudge you through experiences designed to get your attention. If you still refuse to acknowledge the desires of your soul, it will knock a bit louder, perhaps creating an illness, job loss, relationship dispute, or midlife crisis that cannot be easily ignored. This is what you are witnessing in many souls at this time on the planet. It is important to have compassion for those who are going through tough times. Concurrently, it is vital not to identify with the drama and trauma taking place in the lives of many. You cannot help people out of the quicksand if you jump in to commiserate with them. All you can really do is throw them a rope and instruct them in how to pull themselves out. You cannot do it for them. Jumping in through sympathy and codependence is just as ineffective as walking away and pretending there is nobody drowning. Plus, when you jump in, you now have two people drowning instead of one. Most souls that are reading this will be called at some point during the shift to offer assistance, rescue or remedy for the calamities befalling others. If you follow the spiritual principles outlined in this book and ask for inner guidance daily, you will only be given as much as you can handle. For some of you, this will be quite a stretch. You will need to get out of your comfort zone and take more risks. For others, it will be an opportunity to finally stop trying so hard and relax. The philosophy of "let it be" may be just what you need. Then there are those of you who are in between these polarities. In some ways you will be called to act and perhaps intervene in the lives of those who have lost their way, and in other situations, you will be asked to release those you wish to help and simply know that they will make choices based on their own free will and it is not up to you to intervene. Knowing when to act and when to go within is based on your level of self-knowledge. If you listen carefully to your inner wisdom daily, it will get louder, clearer and easier to follow. You will be asked to clear out any negative beliefs, past emotional issues, judgments and self-criticisms. You will be expected to come completely out of denial about what is really taking place both within and without. You will be asked to open your eyes to both the light and dark. Darkness is the state of those places that have not yet opened to receive the light. You cannot dispel darkness by avoiding it. You must shine a high-powered floodlight of wisdom and compassion into the darkest places of this world and within yourself. You must be willing to face your fears and other so-called demons. There is no separation between the inner and outer. What you see in the world is a mirror of what is in you. If you react emotionally to what you see, then you are still identified with it. In other words, the world still has you in its grip. In this book, the author and his spirit guides the founders hope to prove that it is possible to be in the world, but not of the world. We are not going to try and convince you to give up your pleasures and comforts, or sacrifice things that are dear to you. It is okay to make use of the things of this world, including money and material things, especially when you are using them to assist others and when their use helps you become more effective at awakening humanity. After all, they are just tools, unless you ascribe greater importance to them. A journey into the future. Chapter 1 will give you a snapshot of what is to come, based on the prophecy of this channel and his spirit guides. It is written in retrospective, as if the changes have already happened, for in nonlinear time they have. Time is a curious thing. From a human perspective, it unfolds along a linear timeline, from past to present to future. But from a higher point of view, all of it happens at once in this eternal now moment. Therefore, you can go anywhere in the whole of time and space, and perceive what is taking place there. Creation is not static. The past and future are evolving just as much as the present. This is a difficult concept for the human mind to comprehend. Although the Akashic medium stores all soul experience and allows us to recall a linear past, the past is not set in stone. There are an infinite number of timelines and an infinite number of possibilities. Every time you change your consciousness in the past, present or future, you create a new timeline. The prophecy given herein is based on the collective creations of humanity and the various beings assisting, as well as hindering, the evolving souls on Earth. Because Earth is a free will planet, none of the predictions given herein can possibly be 100% accurate. However, according to the Akashic composite, or average probability factor, the level of accuracy is most likely between 80% and 90% for events, and considerably less for specific time periods. You make a difference in the fulfillment or denial of the prophecy. Your healing process is critical to the success or failure of the human race, according to the way you typically use those terms. From the perspective of the founders, there is no success or failure, just a variety of soul experience. Nevertheless, the advanced souls of Earth fervently desire peace, prosperity and the full manifestation of the Golden Age that has been long prophesied. This book is an integral part of the fulfillment of that vision. We will now introduce you to the founders, who will open this book with some background information in preparation for our exciting journey ahead. Greetings, dear creators, we are the founders. It is our pleasure to communicate these ideas, concepts and perceptions to you, the enlightened human beings of planet Earth. If you have read our previous dissertation done in collaboration with this channel, entitled, Earth Changes and Beyond, Messages from the Founders, then you are already somewhat familiar with the material being presented in the earlier chapters of this book. If this is your first experience with our messages or this channel's work, then we welcome you and assure you that we will do everything possible within the constraints of this written format to bring you up to date on what is and will be happening on your planet and in the universe in the years ahead. In the foreword and introduction, we were introduced, and to assist us in getting everyone on the same page, we urge you to read the preparatory material in the front of this book before continuing with us. So let us begin. You, dear humans, are embarking upon the most exciting adventure possible. You are alive at exactly the right time, in exactly the right place in the infinite creation. It is okay if you do not believe this, for within a few short years, almost everything given within these pages will likely manifest itself to some degree within the tangible reality of your lives. That said, the prophecy given herein is not to be taken as gospel truth, or even as undisputed fact. You live on a free will planet and it is not possible for you, us, or anyone to be accurate 100% of the time with predictions. After all, we could prophesy that you will take a right turn at the next fork in the road and you could, given your free will, decide to turn left instead. We may be quite good in predicting your likely choice, but it is your choice, not ours. Your Earth is awakening. In this book, we will explain precisely what this means for you and humanity. It is a wonderful thing, from your point of view. From our point of view, it is an inevitable part of your soul's journey. Your ability to open and receive the wisdom contained in this book, and more importantly, the wisdom contained within your own hearts, minds and spirit, will determine the quality of your experience in the years ahead. The fundamental principle of life on Earth can be summed up as follows. The quality of your consciousness determines your experience of reality. It is not entirely accurate to say that your thoughts create your reality, since your reality can overlap and encompass many other realities that have little to do with your own creative process. If you broaden the definition of thought to include everything within the mind of God, including the thoughts of all other souls in creation, then we would say the idea that thoughts create reality would be a bit more accurate. But you are not there yet. You are currently vibrating at what this channel calls fourth density. At some point in the future of linear time, you will evolve your consciousness to the 12th density, and then you, like us, will be able to create entire universes. Today, that is not your concern. Even if we could, we are not going to offer you a shortcut to the 12th density. We are not going to erase millions of years of soul experience by bestowing upon you the full manifestation of your potential as creator gods before you are even slightly qualified. Yet, paradoxically, we will also remind you that you are already creator gods yourselves, with all the potential to become aware of your 12 selves right now. Our concern at the moment is to give you a roadmap to help you navigate your way through the multitude of earth changes. We are here to help you understand the mechanics and dynamics of the transformation of your species. Did you mistakenly think that Homo sapiens were the final product of evolution? Your journey through physicality is but one chapter in a long and magnificent story. It is the story of how God comes to know itself, through you, as you. You live in a paradox, what some have called the interplay between linear and nonlinear time. From one vantage point, that of linear time, you are souls experiencing the fourth density world of time and space as enlightened humans, while evolving into fifth, sixth and seventh densities, ever expanding your awareness and raising your vibration to higher and more refined states of light. From another vantage point, that of nonlinear time, you are already whole, complete and perfect beings, operating on 12 levels of vibration simultaneously, with past, parallel and future selves all existing at once in their respective dimensions. From this perspective, your creative process is about uncovering the truth of your one being. To do this, you must remove layer upon layer of illusions, false beliefs, and unawareness that have been placed over your true essence. This book will go into the nature of both levels of perception, that of linear and nonlinear time. Within the linear perspective, we will paint you a picture of what is likely to occur on Earth over the next 20 to 30 years or so. To those willing to grow and evolve, it is not only a lovely picture, but a truly amazing one. You are waking up. Planet Earth is waking up. Many years from now, the experiences you have had will seem like a fading dream, mostly a nightmare, wherein you imagined you lived in a world of limitation, disease, poverty, misery, suffering and death. As you dispel these illusions and look upon the world beyond them, it will become harder and harder to even recall the reasons you believed them in the first place. They will seem utterly ridiculous, something reserved for the realm of the stark raving mad. As you awaken from the dream of duality, light and dark, good and bad, right and wrong, us versus them, etc., you will begin to wonder how anyone could have ever believed in those things at all. You will look around you and see two basic conditions, awake and asleep. You will not judge those who are still asleep, but you will feel immense love and compassion for them, for they know not what they seem to do. In their dreams of despair, all manner of misfortune appears to hurl itself at them throughout almost every moment, at every turn in the road. Their lives appear to consist of constantly putting out fires, solving one problem, only to be faced with a dozen more. Your physicist, Albert Einstein, stated that you cannot solve problems at the level upon which they were created. As you rise above the muck and mire of the realms of duality and pierce the veils of illusion, you will see obvious solutions to the problems of humanity. United in this higher vision, the answers to world problems will be readily apparent and straightforward. Implementation of solutions will be quickly forthcoming. Within these pages, some of the methods of implementing solutions will be discussed. We will take a practical approach to life on Earth in this book, but at the same time, the presentation will differ substantially from our previous work in that it will be a bit more nonlinear, a bit more right-brained. There will be more emphasis on direct experience and less on the acquisition of knowledge. At one point in your process it may have been important to know about the history of your planet, but now it is time to turn your attention to the present and future and to discover the vast, creative, spiritual beings that you are and how to express that creativity in the new world that lies before you. This book goes into detail on what to expect as you awaken. We promise not to take the fun out of surprises, for even if we could foretell the entire story, there would still be unexpected twists and turns. That is the nature of free will. Just as a roadmap typically does not tell you everything you could potentially see along your journey, this book cannot and will not do that. It will, however, be of great reassurance as it describes some of the things you are already experiencing, but for which you have little or no reference points. The most critical stage of your awakening involves the need to psychologically detach yourselves from the illusory world that is crumbling around you. We will offer a hands-on approach to coping with the drama and trauma of souls in your environment, especially family members and close friends. We will guide you through realms of consciousness that wax and wane, as you confront the many different levels of reality, some simultaneously imposed upon you by those who falsely believe they are in control of your world. Their little games are coming to an end. As you and your beloved Earth awaken, they have a choice. They either awaken or leave the Earth plane. This is not some sort of ultimatum given them by a judgmental creator, but rather, an outplaying of natural law. In one of your teachings, you have a statement that goes something like this. Every moment you are choosing between the resurrection and the crucifixion. Those of you who are attracted to this book have reached a level of consciousness whereby you no longer need to learn any more about crucifixion. To quote a popular phrase on your world, you've been there, done that. Therefore, the advice in this book will steer you in the direction of the resurrection. To resurrect means to make all things new again. It means to breathe new life into old energy patterns. You see this in the natural world every springtime when new blossoms and leaves burst forth from dormant plants. This is the springtime of your souls, dear creators, and we, the founders, are privileged to be a part of your blossoming. A glimpse of the three parallel Earths. From a linear perspective, it might seem as though certain areas on the Earth will be host to three very different scenarios, but from a nonlinear perspective, there are three parallel Earths all existing simultaneously. Depending upon which perspective is taken, each of you will choose a specific version of Earth upon which to continue your embodiment. For you, the descriptions given in Chapter 1 will ultimately have the personal meaning you ascribe to them based on your level of understanding. In a later chapter, we will explore in more detail the qualities and lifestyles inherent to the three parallel Earths. For now, we are simply introducing the topic and are weaving it into the story to follow. Personal and collective co-creation. Your personal viewpoint on life is added to the collective viewpoint of humanity because you are all one being, manifesting itself as individual human beings. The publishing of this material and your subsequent reading of it reflects one of the creative urges of your individual being that is influencing the collective being of humanity. Reading this material will affect the outcome of some of the free will events now taking place. The visions given herein are declarations of creative intent, and the willingness of the reader to come on board and participate in those creations will determine to some extent the ultimate success and level of manifestation of many of your personal and collective visions. Some descriptions given herein are beyond free will and they will happen no matter what you think, feel or do. Others are largely dependent upon your state of consciousness and resulting actions. As you read the scenarios presented in Chapter 1, we not only urge you to keep an open mind, but to consider the possibility that as you embrace these scenarios, you add your personal creative energy to the collective vision of humanity and therefore strengthen the dominant timeline that is bringing these scenarios into manifestation on the Earth. Once again, we repeat, these are the most likely scenarios based on what is being created at this time. For the most part, they are not set in stone, even though the celestial events themselves are beyond human free will at the present time. Passing through the 2012 portal. In our previous book, Earth Changes and Beyond, we gave our perception of what happened during the precessional shift of December 21, 2012, from various vantage points. Now we will move our starting point to the beginning of 2017. We will move just far enough into the future to present the information in Chapter 1 as if the events of the next 20 years have already transpired. For those of you reading this book at any time between 2017 and 2030, the following account should make perfect sense, especially if you are connected to and are networking with lightworkers around the planet and are aware of the many activities taking place to help humanity awaken. For those of you on the path of ascension, moving through the portals and stargates of the next 15 to 20 years might feel a little like having someone in a position of authority tell you that you have made the grade. You could think of a college professor who holds the key to your graduation in his hands as he holds up the final examination for the course you just completed. Your heart beats a little faster as he comes to your desk with paper in hand. "Congratulations," he says, as he places the exam face up on your desk. "You needed 95% to be admitted to the School of Ascension. You got 97%. A warm glow moves over you and a deep sense of peace, the kind of peace that comes with no wing. You have fulfilled your mission. For those of you who are part of the new enlightened humanity on Earth, but who are not yet ready for ascension, moving through the portals will involve a certainty, a no wing without a shadow of a doubt, that things will never be the same again in your life. Your hard work has paid off. You have tipped the balance. The truth that you are a divine being of loving light is now the dominant thought in your consciousness. There is no longer any doubt that you are on your right path. You will help rebuild the earth, along with your fellow travelers, who join in great merriment with you, dancing and rejoicing, as you wipe away the tears of sorrow that still stain your faces from yesterday's drama and trauma. With the help of your teachers, those members of humanity who are going on into ascension, you, the pioneers of the new earth, will set about to tackle the great tasks in front of you. You have been entrusted with the responsibility of creating a new society based on principles of higher truth. You are the loving outer expressions of the fourth-dimensional earth. Your task is to come together in communities of light, utilizing alternative energy sources to power your homes and common areas. Before we begin our story, we know some of you need further clarification on the meaning of portals and stargates. You have, perhaps, been given some examples in your science fiction books, movies and television shows. The concept of wormhole, used often in both science and science fiction, is a good place to start our explanation. Let us add to that the idea of a quantum jump, or sudden shift from one level of perception to another. A simple example of this would be coming out of a cloud bank in a jet aircraft that is ascending in altitude. At the moment the plane breaks the top of the cloud deck, the world changes radically from one of dark gray and almost no visibility, to one of bright blue skies with nearly infinite visibility. The words portal and stargate are used interchangeably here, but in previous material they were differentiated slightly. A portal is a wormhole, or tunnel, between two relatively localized levels of reality, while a stargate is a similar construct occurring more on a macro scale. The black hole at the center of many galaxies is a type of stargate because it tunnels into a corresponding white hole that resides at the center of a parallel mirror galaxy in a parallel mirror universe. As mentioned in previous writings, the phenomenon of black holes is one of the hardest ideas for your modern scientists to grapple with because such objects appear to violate the law of conservation of energy, one of the most basic laws in the universe. When you consider that the black holes at the center of your galaxies tunnel through into white holes at the center of sister galaxies in a sister universe that exactly mirrors your own but with opposite polarities not only electromagnetically but gravitationally and with respect to time and space, then all of a sudden things become clear. The law of conservation is restored and, with a little advanced mathematics, a theory of everything, linking all the basic forces together, can be derived. In a later chapter, we have given a partial explanation of how all the basic forces of physics are related. Portals and stargates can be considered to be doorways between levels, planes, dimensions, worlds, or regions of the universe. If a further explanation is needed when discussing a specific realm, we will give the necessary details at that time. Keep in mind that we are aware that most of you are not physicists and will not understand rigorous mathematics, so we will do our best to explain our ideas in lay terms. Now, let us venture forth and glimpse the new world. Chapter 1. A future timeline overview. Your food is organic. Your water is pure, sweet and clear. Your medicine is a combination of the best that technology has to offer, tempered with common sense and a return to natural, herbal remedies. All are freely provided by loving supportive souls. The era of haves and have-nots has ended. You are all prosperous beyond your wildest imagination because you have been given the keys to the kingdom. With the help of your ascended master friends and spirit guides, you have been shown how to turn this earth into a paradise, a new Garden of Eden. You know that this time the peace is real. It will not fade and wither with the return of winter. You see the old world crumbling before your eyes, but this is the last time you will be a part of the rise and fall of civilizations. You will no longer see humanity rise to great heights only to fall once again. This new earth that you can feel within your bones is here to stay. You are on the other side of the 2012 portal. The remnants of a comet have passed by in 2017. Nibiru has made its approach in 2030 and is now moving away. You feel the energies of the galactic shift reach its peak and finally begin to subside. It is the year 2031 and the new Earth is finally dawning after what seemed to be many delays. You know that more great changes are coming and more of the old Earth is crumbling. Layer upon layer of vested interests, lobbies, self-serving leaders, broken medical models, old economic paradigms, and outdated legal systems keep crashing down around you, leaving a little pile of rubble where once great institutions seem to sit. You do not mourn the loss of these buildings built on sand. You feel compassion for those that worshipped in these halls of mirrors, believing their salvation rested on their retirement plan or stock portfolio. Yet you knew these securities were anything but secure. In your fourth density world, you are now living in an extended family setting, or intentional community. Here, the things of real value are grown in small plots, or come streaming into solar panels atop a roof. Today, a young inventor comes to your community, demonstrating his zero-point energy device. Up until about 2020, he was having difficulty getting his device to function consistently. Now, on the other side of the various shifts, it seems to work just fine, as if it had been doing so all along. The negativity that once counteracted the quantum force is no longer present. Acceptance for the unlimited abundance of creation has come to this community, and now the tangible, physical proof of the immutable law of infinite love has come as well. The portals of 2012, 2017 and 2030. It wasn't always this easy. In fact, when this was first written, the channel was on the other side of these shifts. The dominant reality on Earth still seemed to involve broken political promises, dire poverty, rampant radiation from leaking power plants, polluted oceans from fossil fuel spills, erratic weather, and monstrous uncontrollable economic debt. So to see through the illusions of the crumbling world to the shining vision of the future, he began, with our help and the help of thousands of lightworkers, to formulate a plan for maximizing the opportunities afforded by the portal shifts. Many had gathered in sacred spots in every continent to help anchor the shifts. In some places, just a few souls were able to be present physically, while in others, several hundred, or even a few thousand, came to pray, meditate, sing, dance, and share stories. Rituals were set up to prepare individuals as each shift grew closer. During the sacred times in 2012, 2017 and 2030, light pure food and pristine water were brought into the ceremonial sites, along with portable toilets and, if necessary, electrical generators, depending on the level of need. Transport vehicles were left behind, and for several days, souls simply stayed within the relative confines of their sacred sites, camping and resting as needed. Knowing they would likely be unable to use their various electronic devices, they were content to turn them off and simply be with each other, often in silence, sometimes in laughter or tears. In some locations, great circles or labyrinths were constructed and various sacred rituals were enacted within the circles. Costumes were donned, the talking stick was passed, drums were beat, and heartfelt expression poured forth. Very few knew what to expect as they moved through each shift. Some posited that nothing much would change, the days would come and go, they would have fun praying and dancing together, they would go home, back to their families, jobs, and responsibilities. From a third density perspective, this is indeed what happened for many. But even in those hard skeptics and pragmatic realists, something had shifted profoundly. During the shifts, time seemed to move very slowly at first, and then stop. For an undetermined amount of time, the souls who came together felt a deep embrace of something they could not define. It was as if they had always been together, here on the mountaintop, or desert, or sacred gathering place. The campfire, labyrinth, medicine wheel, tents, and musical instruments were part of a cosmic dance that went on forever. Then the shifts were over. Or were they? As the souls slowly packed up their gear and returned to their vehicles to begin the journey back to their old lives, there was a distinct feeling that nothing would ever be the same again. A door had opened, they had walked through it, it had closed behind them, never to be revisited in the same way. These souls who had taken part in the sacred portals were just plain different. The world of wars, disaster, control, manipulation, propaganda, consumerism, and endless mindless entertainment, no longer seemed real at all. These souls no longer had anything in common with that world. It did not even matter whether it existed or not. It was of little or no consequence. The world they had experienced in the sacred circle, high on the mountaintop, during those sacred times, was more real than anything they had experienced up to that point in their lives. Some souls had been to numerous personal growth workshops and intensive events over the years and knew about the temporary high that happens when like-minded souls come together. They knew all about how it wears off a few days later as they once again become absorbed back into the all-too-familiar world of the rat race. But this time was truly different. They simply could not integrate back into the old ways. Those lives were now meaningless. There was no energy or will left to pursue the old patterns of conquest and dominion. Eagerly, these transformed souls looked forward to the next meeting on the mountain, or journey to the desert, with their newfound friends. The most difficult lesson for the newly expanded souls involved how to relate to family and friends who had not participated in the ceremonies and rituals. Some of those who had stayed behind were just fine. Perhaps they had stopped to meditate wherever they were, in the cities, at the office, while walking in the shopping mall. In a few cases, those who did not escape the daily grind, were already integrated within their souls and were able to detach from the confusion and chaos that seemed to be increasing in the masses of humanity. But for a great many returning from ceremony that were visiting or living with friends and family, communication became difficult because there was a profound shift of values and perceptions in the enlightened ones. A family member or loved one may have approached a transformed soul and berated him for not taking care of certain earthly responsibilities while on vacation. To the enlightened soul, such accusations were baseless, pointless, and irrelevant. Of course, love and compassion were still there in the newly transformed souls, probably more so than ever before, but the emotional attachment to living according to a certain set of belief systems had been severed. The awakened souls were in the world, but no longer of the world. It became evident to many of the newly awakened souls that some of their friends and family members would not be making the journey into higher planes with them, and so the process of letting go, forgiving and releasing of loved ones began. Much grief was expressed and integrated. The enlightened ones knew that these beloved friends and family had chosen another path and that that path must be honored and respected. All the transformed ones could do was become an example of a new way of life. It was up to each family member to come on board or not. Physical changes in fourth density souls. Before the opening of the portals, many souls had heard of physical immortality, longevity, miraculous healing, and spontaneous regeneration, but such ideas sounded like the work of those with an overactive imagination, or perhaps the delusions of those who refused to face their mortality. Those things happen to a few saints and yogis who meditate several hours a day, but they would never happen to me. That was a common reprise in those days. But now something exciting was happening. Blemishes on the skin were disappearing that had been there for years. More energy was moving up and down the spine, even during times of low energy. So-called idle thoughts seemed to take on a life of their own, and the phrase, "Be careful what you ask for, you just might get it," became the newly recognized law of the land. There were so many synchronicities occurring that the enlightened souls simply could not discount them. Things were happening that no amount of imagination could conjure up. It was not a case of things being too good to be true. There was no sense that the shoe would drop and the negative karma would come barreling back in, crushing everything in its path. No, reality had changed. The force that seemed to stamp out the hopeful, happy thoughts in times past simply failed to materialize any longer. It was as if a huge segment of the population of Earth, those with the most negativity, had suddenly disappeared. They no longer existed in this new reality, at least not energetically. The people experiencing this disconnect from the old world were reminded of a movie they saw once, where those with real souls appeared in living color, and everyone else appeared in black and white. While they knew that all creatures had souls, they began to wonder if the souls of many around the world had departed, leaving empty shells for bodies. It was as though there were now two separate worlds, one with sovereign souls, alive and vital, and one with empty shells simply going through the motions of life without really living. The fourth density souls were still human. They had feelings other than pure joy and ecstasy. But they were just feelings. These souls were no longer identifying with the feelings. Those sensations and impressions simply came and went like the wind. The third density humans still had souls, but they were caught up in the drama of daily life and were less and less available for interaction with the enlightened souls. In actuality, there were now three worlds. For those on the path of ascension into fifth density were starting to see things they had never seen before. The woods were alive with creatures of all shapes and colors. You could literally hear the consciousness of the wind as it whispered in the trees. Everything vibrated and shimmered, not just with light, but with consciousness. A profound sense of oneness permeated everything. Although the newly ascended could still see and hear those in the fourth density New Earth, it was evident that those in fourth density could not see or experience a lot of these new fifth density realities. As the days moved along and the Earth began to move out of the peak position of the galactic shift, people realized the changes were permanent. The enlightened ones simply could not go back to their old ways of living. Everything in their lives was being orchestrated from on high. They were being moved into their new positions of responsibility. If they attempted to make choices that went against their highest soul path, there would be no energy available to continue along the lines of any of those choices if such actions or ideas were based on ego or old ways of thinking. In some cases, the mind simply stopped working altogether, at least the logical, rational, analytical mind that was used to controlling everything. Conversely, whenever a soul decided to act on a higher impulse, one in alignment with that soul's true purpose, rushes of seemingly endless energy would be available. The right people would show up. The right situations would present themselves. It became incredibly easy to make wise choices because those decisions coming from the limited perception of ego would be even less than unappealing. They would feel simply awful and disgusting. Old habits dropped away easily from that point forward in the fourth density souls. All of a sudden, smokers had no desire to light another cigarette. Bottles of liquor lost their charm. A batch of prescription medicine lay untouched. Aside from ceremonial or sacramental purposes, drugs held no interest. Dense, processed foods offered no solace. The newly awakened souls were drawn to foods and activities that had aliveness and vitality that promoted their growth and well-being. Whenever souls on the fourth density path encountered those in third density, they would have nothing in common. For all intents and purposes, third density souls existed in black and white, not in color. Their lives were completely meaningless to those who had gone through the portals. The enlightened humans had a lot of compassion for those who did not make the journey with them, but try as they might, they simply could not empathize or sympathize anymore. These two groups of souls now seem to live in separate realities. The fifth density souls were still able to relate to fourth density. In fact, they became the teachers of the new Earth, having sufficiently integrated their negativity to the point where they could clearly see the dynamics of relationship and energetic interaction within their fourth density students. The fourth density souls were grateful for the presence of the ascended ones in fifth density. They felt nurtured, loved and cared for deeply, and knew the journey into ascension would be much easier now that some had crossed the barrier into true immortality. The fifth density souls did not disappear into the light in an instant, like the Christian rapture. They still appeared humanoid and could interact in a somewhat normal way with the fourth density souls, but their bodies were rapidly becoming more radiant and eventually started to glow. As time went along, they became impervious to changes in the environment, able to stay awake for long periods and withstand great differences of temperature. Eventually, they no longer required food or shelter. The view from below. To those stuck in third density, including souls who willingly refused to be a part of the new Earth, it seemed as if the enlightened ones had stepped off the deep end of the swimming pool, or had fallen off a cliff. They appeared to babble nonsense and behave in lunatic ways. For a time, the people of the old world felt a sense of loss over the perception that their loved ones had flipped out or joined some crazy environmental movement or spiritual community, but when the unenlightened souls realized there was nothing they could do to bring back their lost brothers and sisters, they resigned to go back to business as usual. Although the institutions they had come to rely on were decaying and dying, the ignorant ones hardly noticed. Every time a new austerity measure would be introduced, or stricter regulation was placed on consumption of a precious resource, they merely went along with this, rationalizing that it was probably best for all. Their lives had become analogous to frogs in a gradually boiling pot of water. Little by little, their freedoms eroded, but they did not notice. Many of the unenlightened souls had unexplainable ailments. Their bodies did not seem to work as well as before. The doctors could find nothing wrong, or in some cases, they found everything wrong, and illness became so commonplace that it was considered the norm. When rationing of goods and supplies began, at first it was weakly protested, but soon the herd mentality took over and people decided that a few basic necessities were better than none at all, and so they decided to put up with the hardships. The fourth density souls leave their third density families behind. As we mentioned a while ago, one of the hardest aspects of this transition was the divergence that cut across family ties. Many of the enlightened souls were misunderstood by their blood families and in some cases had even been disowned. Occasionally the awakened ones were mocked outright, with siblings shaking their heads in disbelief. Other family members merely concluded that the enlightened ones were psychologically escaping the many problems facing humanity and had opted for a utopian fairy tale version of life offering no semblance of reality. Often, spouses and close family members would offer token outer support, such as loaning them money to fulfill their extravagant and unworldly dreams, while in other cases they were cut out of the will, or pressured to sell their share of the family fortune. Of course, the biggest challenges were emotional. Family bonds can run quite deep and it quickly became evident for many that this was a permanent and complete separation, at least for this lifetime. Tears flowed on both sides of the issue, and while those stuck in third density would likely hold resentment and regret for years to come, the lightworkers quickly forgave and, with the help of their new spiritual family and friends, processed the grief and sorrow that arose from the departure. As soon as the lightworkers left their third density families, life began to improve dramatically for most fourth density souls. Suddenly the cloud was lifted and the bright sunshine of their new life illuminated their minds and hearts. For the first time in this embodiment, they felt free and unburdened. Although there were a multitude of challenges facing them as they embarked upon their new lives, there was an enthusiasm they had rarely felt before. Part idealism, part realism and part inspiration, they rejoiced at the opportunities in front of them to finally build a society that truly served the needs of every participating soul. They came together in 2s, 3s, 4s, 6s, 10s, 20s and more. They all had one thing in common. They were here to build a new Earth, in some cases largely from scratch, and in other cases with the help of advanced technologies and experts in various fields of study. The period of 2017 to 2030. As this time period began coming to a close, the three worlds, third, fourth and fifth density civilization, diverged even more. Those in the fourth and fifth densities structured their lives in such a way that they rarely, if ever, needed to go into the places where the third density humans were struggling to live. A few higher souls were given assignments in the third density world. Perhaps they were working off karma from past lifetimes, or still felt so much empathy and sympathy that they could not completely abandon the world of strife and discord. Or perhaps they had skills that their spirit guides felt were important to offer to those in third density. Being solidly part of fourth density, however, these enlightened souls were able to venture forth with minimal discomfort and offer assistance to those still stuck in the old ways. Their efforts were sometimes rewarded. These few cases of successful rescue allowed a small number of third-density souls to crawl out of their holes of negative belief and enter into the grace of the higher realms. As the worlds continued their divergence, fewer and fewer higher-density beings were able to render assistance to those trapped in third density. Every day, the enlightened ones would pray for those left behind, but it was becoming apparent that souls were reaping the benefits of that which they had sown, over many lifetimes in most cases. To those building the cities of light in the fourth density, the daily and ever-escalating crises of the third density world seemed remote and unreal. Even when a disaster was only a few miles away, they did not notice. Eventually, such turbulence completely stopped affecting the enlightened souls. The cities of light were not isolated. Fourth density souls did not build barricades against the third density would-be intruders. The enlightened ones did not worry about bands of roving gangs raping and pillaging everything in their path in their desperate search for food and fresh water. Because the vibration of the fourth density souls was so unlike the intruders, a violent gang could walk right past an enlightened community and not even see it. This is psychological invisibility. Having so little in common with others, the law of attraction was not applicable. Actually, it did apply, but in the form of non-attraction. The souls in the new earth no longer had any negative karma to work out that would attract disaster into their midst, and so they were protected. The enlightened ones developed new technologies that were built to resist the electromagnetic fluctuations hitting the earth daily. They were able to communicate with other groups around the planet using aspects of telecommunications that were still operational from the old grid system, while slowly replacing those systems with new technologies. While many of the satellites that the old world had come to depend on were being neutralized by solar flares and electromagnetic anomalies, the enlightened ones were able to install new devices in the outer atmosphere that had the same protection around them that was afforded to their communities of light. The awakened souls traded and bartered for what they needed. They began to refine and perfect zero-point energy devices, which meant there would be ways of quickly traveling around the world without depleting the Earth's dwindling resources. Using new agricultural methods, they began devising ways of feeding everyone more easily. Although there were still issues in close relationships, the movement away from ego domination resulted in far fewer conflicts than before the portal shifts. Note: in a later chapter, we have gone into detail on the subjects mentioned in the preceding paragraph. Moving beyond 2030. As the souls on Earth continued their journey, the divergence between the three societies continued to become more noticeable. Those in the fourth density began moving more fully into a total commitment to their new way of life. Many chose to sell their properties in the cities and move to the country. Some chose to purchase a 5-acre farm, complete with barn, corral, pasture, and in some cases, animals. Others went in together, pooling their finances, and acquired larger acreage with the intention of building individual homes and collective meeting facilities. It became obvious that the things of greatest value were inner wisdom and a knowingness of one's connection to God, the cultivation of healthy human relationships, the ability to share fertile land, and knowledge of how to create and maintain alternative energy sources. Although the specific arrangements, financial structures, legal agreements and such that were necessary to acquire the land and energy resources varied from person to person and community to community, the lightworkers used their inner creative power to work out the details and move forward with the building of their intentional communities of light. This process was not straightforward. Below, we have gone into a bit more detail regarding the all-important task of learning how to truly live and create together. Challenges in the enlightened communities. Up until the completion of the portals, attempting to live in an intentional community was a very arduous task for the enlightened souls of Earth. Often, the ego would get in the way of even the most simple of tasks. Usually some form of struggle would beset the evolving community, whether it pertained to financial and legal issues, or involved intimate relationships. There were issues with physical and emotional boundaries. Without a high degree of intuitive awareness, souls would often have ulterior motives for joining a community. Many had hidden agendas behind their actions and intentions. Some wanted to be taken care of by others, and there were those that were bossy and demanding. Imbalances would show up after souls had made a financial commitment to a particular place, so it was not easy to simply move out. For example, a thriving community would need a balance of labor, skills and areas of expertise. It would not do well if you had, say, 100 plumbers and no electricians, or 10 administrators and no money. Eventually the communities emerging on Earth would need to learn self-sufficiency, meaning that they would not rely at all on the old world monetary or global distribution system. That was almost unheard of before the portal shifts and was still rare on Earth in the year 2030. Of course, they had a lot of motivation to become self-sufficient due to the rapidly deteriorating global distribution system in third density. So the evolving souls on Earth quickly discovered that they must come together in prayer, meditation and intention, using advanced healing modalities and creative manifesting skills in order to attract exactly the right souls to each location. They needed to maintain a perfect balance, not just in labor expertise, but in consciousness. Not every soul would be at the same level of awareness. There would undoubtedly still be some karmic lessons to learn that would draw souls together, as well as those who would have no sense of direction or purpose. Others would be there simply to co-create with the enlightened beings and would go with the flow to assist wherever needed. Above all else, love was the glue, the common thread holding the fledgling communities together. The enlightened souls discovered that it was essential to meditate together and hold visioning meetings, often daily and sometimes for hours, as long as they took enough time to complete their basic tasks, such as emptying the compost, or stopping the water leak. As things unfolded, the enlightened souls started to see that the power of group consciousness was enough to overcome the most difficult of challenges, whether they were financial, social, geological, or otherwise. The emergence of zero-point energy. As the calendar marched forward, several factors began to enter into the equation for the various groups of souls on Earth. The rapidly rising vibration of the planet was now sufficient to allow exciting new technologies to be introduced. In the past, and especially before the opening of the portals, inventors of zero-point energy machines and other technologies were unable to overcome the mass consciousness of lack, limitation and scarcity. The negatively oriented masses emanated a polarized quantum field that exerted an imbalanced level of energy on the Earth's grid system, thus penetrating the positively polarized electromagnetic field of the inventors and their machines. This prevented the machines from working correctly. In the rare event that a machine continued to function properly in the zero-point field while amongst negatively oriented souls, the sheer magnitude of the opposition was still enough to prevent production and distribution of the device. Now, the opposition was waning. The third density powers that be were losing control, and fast. It seemed hardly a day went by where there was not some catastrophe or malfunction in their military machines, computer systems and government interfaces. It was as though anything that could go wrong would go wrong. And so the positively oriented inventors encountered less and less opposition to bringing forth the fruits of their creative endeavors. As the souls in the enlightened communities continued to grow and evolve, healing old emotional issues, releasing limiting beliefs, and eliminating toxins from their lower bodies, a brilliant and strong force field of light began to form around each community. This positively oriented quantum field matched the energy of the zero-point devices and allowed them to function correctly and efficiently. It also acted as a shield to prevent negatively oriented souls from encroaching upon the settlements of the enlightened ones. Eventually, such force fields became tangible enough to prevent all negative souls from even entering the property. Not only would groups of malevolent souls march right on past the property line, but in the unlikely event that one of the dark souls did manage to venture into the enlightened community, something would invariably befall that soul, preventing him from doing any damage. In some cases, such soul would be taken in by the community, healed and restored to a balanced state. This could only happen with souls who were ready. If they were too deeply embedded in darkness, being exposed to the loving vibrations of the community would be too much. In a few cases, such souls could be seen fleeing in terror to the relative safety of their egocentric comrades in third density. In other cases, mysterious illnesses would befall them and force them to retreat. It became more and more obvious that the gulf between the enlightened New Earth and the old world of misery, poverty, suffering, malice, greed, oppression and control, was widening. Many of Earth religions had been calling this phenomenon, the separating of the wheat from the chaff. Note: we in the higher realms do not use terminology such as separating the wheat from the chaff, because it implies judgment that some souls are more worthy of ascension than others, and that is simply not the case. Natural laws are at work here. The law of attraction suggests that souls with an extreme variance in vibration cannot and will not work together unless there is a strong karmic bond between them. Since karmic lessons are coming to an end on Earth over the next several years, fewer and fewer of these kinds of relationships are manifesting in the evolving souls. Further note: the law of attraction and the law of karma actually work hand in hand. There are essentially three ways souls are attracted to one another. 1. For co-creative purposes, souls of similar vibration will come together, as described in this narrative. 2. You may attract souls of a lesser vibration who have a karmic contract to learn from you. In other words, you are the teacher, they are the students. And 3. You may attract teachers to you who are vibrating at a higher level because your soul wants to learn how to attain that higher frequency. As the awakened ones worked daily to clear themselves of primal fears and ego control, the gulf between these souls and the third density world continued to grow, until the force field of light around the community became so great that it was completely and totally protected from all negativity. Before the portals, the awakening souls still had too much unresolved emotional and mental baggage to be able to create such a powerful force field. Now, with their deep commitment to healing and help from the multitudes of guides in the heavenly realms, the enlightened souls finally had the beginnings of what they had been working long and hard for, a beautiful new world, still fragile, but filled with certainty, knowingness and balance. The emergence of the Councils of Light. There were councils of light that formed from the membership of the various intentional communities evolving on Earth. These councils consisted of members of the communities that volunteered to be in those roles, coupled with those who were voted in by the members at large. Council members would listen carefully to the people and make wise decisions based on the will of all the enlightened souls in the community. The councils were not based on any existing form of third-density government, but borrowed from the most enlightened ideas inherent within those structures, along with brand new ideas brought forth from on high. Some communities explored the idea of consensus, while others practiced majority rule. However, it quickly became apparent that there was another way of making decisions that transcended consensus and majority. Council members would go into meditation, become one with each other, and simply know how to proceed. Note: we, the founders, have observed that almost all higher dimensional worlds and systems use a form of enlightened councils for making decisions. This body of light beings does not coerce, demand, or dictate the laws of the worlds to which it is entrusted. As you evolve, such a structure is possible because every soul becomes a master, able to discern and determine the highest and best course of action for all concerned. We have devoted Chapter 12 to an exploration of various social and political systems on other worlds that are more evolved than Earth. The collapse of the Old World Order. As Earth continued to go through the galactic shift and divergence, the communities of light depended on one another for supplies and technology. Souls would travel, using whatever means were available, between the communities of light scattered across the globe. Although conventional means of transportation were still available, it was becoming increasingly difficult to depend on automobiles, buses, trains, boats, and airplanes to get around on Earth. This was due largely to the rapid destabilization of currencies and monetary systems among the major countries. Fossil fuel costs were astronomical and few could afford to replenish their supplies. The cost of goods and services also skyrocketed, and spot shortages of so-called basic commodities began to become apparent, even in the most technologically advanced places within the third density structure. The enlightened souls used trade and barter primarily, and relied as little as possible on sources of transport based on fossil fuels. Those that still interacted with the third density world discovered that the currency in use, whether dollars, pounds, yen or euros, would seldom remain stable long enough to depend on as a means of trade. Things of real value would fetch a very high price in the open markets. There was a lot of chaos in the bigger cities, particularly those located in places that depended heavily on global transport, such as metropolitan areas in the deserts and along seacoasts. The coasts were largely fished out, so sustenance usually came from distant lands that grew crops with inferior nutrition, mostly with depleted soil. The few factories that could produce the necessities of third density life were having trouble receiving enough raw materials to stay open. The third density governments were painfully aware of these problems, but due to their identification with ego, spent long hours arguing, debating and rarely resolving their differences. As the Earth continued to rise in vibration, more and more negativity would surface in the governing bodies of the major countries. Unable to handle the rising tide of anger and fear, it was commonplace to witness assassinations, blockages, embargoes, regional wars, and work stoppages. Although many of the workers competing for jobs in the few remaining functioning factories were critical to the success of the operations, their bodies were weakening under the constant stress of living in a world with too many people and too few resources. The air, water, food and buildings were heavily polluted, and this pollution was taking a toll on the immune systems of the third density souls. From a deeper perspective, souls stuck in third density knew they could not keep pace with the rapidly accelerating changes occurring with Mother Earth herself. Earth was now a fourth density planet, and the third density souls realized they were like fish out of water. Their level of vibration was no longer compatible with the basic frequencies of the Earth herself. Something had to give, and it was the immune system. Incidents of illness continued to rise until the sick filled hospitals to overflowing. Lack of medical supplies and inability to pay doctors and nurses due to the failing economy resulted in long waits for medical care. In countries with government-sponsored medicine, the high cost of rendering assistance to the sick was bankrupting the system. When enlightened souls returned to their respective communities after venturing forth into such a world, a period of detoxification would be necessary. Members of the fourth density spiritual communities would come forth to offer healing and counseling to returning souls until the negativity was sufficiently cleared. The enlightened ones had great compassion for the suffering happening in the third density cities, but there was very little they could do about it except to continuously send prayer and loving thoughts far and wide. They had long ago realized that attempting to rescue struggling humanity and to save them from themselves was a losing proposition, akin to having a messiah complex. Furthermore, it often violated the free will of the dying souls, who likely needed to learn about the relationship between consciousness and their circumstances. It had taken the enlightened ones years to learn these lessons themselves. For a long time, many of them had pleaded with the extraterrestrials to come pluck them off the earth in their gleaming motherships and take them to a world without war, poverty and suffering. This was not to be. The fourth density souls did not volunteer to come to Earth, only to leave at the first opportunity. They were here to do the hard work of healing and resurrecting higher truth principles, one step at a time. Despite the beautiful picture painted by some souls, regarding the emerging new communities, life was not easy for a lot of the enlightened souls. Old addictive behaviors ran deep, and while the portals had advanced their consciousness immeasurably, it was not a magic pill instantly eliminating the old self. In fact, it was a little like a young bird being pushed out of the nest and being forced to fly or die. Souls could no longer have second thoughts and try to go back to the way things were before. That comfortable little world no longer existed. It was unraveling day by day. The dying realm of third density. As the years came and went, the situation in the third density realm became even more turbulent. Sea levels were rising and erratic weather patterns were causing crop failures and devastation on a scale never before experienced. Those who still clung to the idea that they were in control would introduce new currencies and trade regulations, but the problems remained. The soldiers started refusing to fight in the endless conflicts staged by one group or another in a vain attempt to remain in control. Some countries tried to instigate mandatory enlistment, but were met with tremendous opposition from their own people. Protesters lined the streets and walkways leading up to the institutions of government. Many had long ago lost their employment and some were homeless and had nothing better to do than camp out near the locations where the leaders met and quarreled endlessly about how to handle the situation. A few relatively enlightened leaders would propose radical solutions, only to be shot down, sometimes literally, by those who were trying vainly to return to some semblance of the world they had once known. Civil war broke out in the larger and seemingly more organized countries. Attempts were made to overthrow the existing rulers, but usually when such actions were successful, the new leaders found they were equally unable to resolve the immense problems faced by everyone. Dwindling natural resources became the primary reason for going to war, and all so-called civilities and rules of war were abandoned. In a sense, it was every man for himself, and every woman for herself. Some time earlier, the world's population had reached its peak, at around 8 billion humans. The depletion of natural resources, coupled with massive pollution and immune system failure, raised death rates in most areas while simultaneously lowering the birth rate. Many of the genetically modified substances being consumed on a regular basis, along with toxic metals in the water supply, contributed to partial or total sterility amongst women of childbearing age. Add to this a contribution of bioterrorism agents from extremist groups, including adulteration of medications and vaccines, and you could understand why this birth-death situation was occurring. Seeing no way out of the mess, many souls began getting their affairs in order in preparation for exiting the earth plane and reincarnating somewhere else. Mysterious, unexplained illnesses were now so common as to barely garner mention in the nightly news. Yet still, many remained in denial, reassuring each other that things would return to normal. The young people were a bit more rebellious and started refusing to obey the strict mandates being handed down from the so-called controllers. Every night, violence would erupt in the larger cities, usually between youth and police or soldiers. However, increasingly, the military and police forces were also becoming disillusioned and disheartened. Many joined the opposition forces and tried to overthrow their own authorities. The so-called entitlement programs designed to help the less fortunate were also being abandoned as the stark reality of financial and moral bankruptcy began to sink in. Not knowing where to turn, souls resorted to basic survival skills, often barricading themselves in their homes after storing what little food they could find. Although war expanded at first, the divine dispensation preventing the use of weapons of mass destruction meant that only a small percentage of humanity actually died in battle or from dropped bombs. Many soldiers during that period simply refused to fight, while others dropped out of the military due to deteriorating immune systems. A few were able to raise their vibration sufficiently to find their way into the enlightened communities, but this was becoming quite rare. The new Earth begins to emerge. The fourth density souls were thriving. They were developing new modes of transportation and agriculture. They were starting to use electromagnetic motors that consumed almost no natural resources and cost almost nothing to operate. Another important factor was the return of the star beings. Although many had been waiting for what seemed like forever to reunite with their brothers and sisters from the heavens, the actual meetings were quite unlike the expectations of most. First of all, the ETs were not going to save anyone or take away the pain and challenge of growth. Initially, they would come tentatively for brief visits to some of the evolving communities, never staying very long, lest they get caught in the vibrations of Earth. They chose their witnesses carefully, making sure the fourth density humans were emotionally stable enough to be in their presence. To a few humans they would leave explicit instructions on how to perfect a technological device. To others, they would offer a plan for resolving conflict in personal relationships. They did not sell tickets to Arcturus. The new humans were simply not ready for that. A select few members from each community were solidly on the path of ascension into the fifth density light body. They were allowed to interact more freely with the ETs. Most of the space visitors came from the Pleiades and Arcturus, with a few Sirians. The humans quickly learned that there are strict protocols for intervention in the affairs of Earth. If it is not your time to interact with ETs, then try as you might, you will not see them. The beautiful ET souls visiting Earth had learned a long time ago the true meaning of "do not cast your pearls before swine." They knew that only certain human beings could use the sacred knowledge of the stars wisely and for the good of all. They also realized, after many past mistakes, that it is not always easy to understand human free will. They had to humble themselves and recognize that interacting with humans and having respect for free will are difficult and tricky operations. If you are an ET visitor to Earth, you do not simply go to a weekend seminar in how to understand human free will. It takes a lot of diligence and determination to grasp, on a deep level, the whole psyche of humanity. As the portals came and went, the divergence continued, but another major factor was affecting humanity. The effects of the portals on time. Although the energies stayed very high on Earth following the portal shifts, with rapid change continuing relentlessly, some things had begun to settle down a bit since then. The axis of the Earth had now moved slightly away from the scalar electromagnetic frequencies streaming forth from the quasars near the central sun of the galaxy. One of the curious side effects of the portals had been the compressing of time. To many humans, a day seemed to be only about 8 or 9 hours long during the shifts of 2012, 2017 and 2030. Now, as the Earth changed her position, the days became seemingly longer, back to about 12 hours in length, but still perceived as much shorter than they were prior to the years 2012 to 2030. New energies were detected among the clairvoyants and prophets. Scientists had discovered a mutation occurring in humans, which was accelerated during each portal. The enlightened ones already knew that the precessional alignment of 2012 was the first wave of ascension, the remnants of the comet of 2017, the second wave of ascension, and the passage of Nibiru in 2030, the third wave of ascension. This meant that those fourth-density souls who were ready to move to the next stage of evolution would get a giant boost every time a portal was opened. The third-density world was deteriorating rapidly. Deaths were now outnumbering births in all but a few places. The combination of radiation from nuclear reactors, coupled with pollution from fossil fuels, and exotic viruses and bacteria, were too much for the failing immune systems of the third-density humans. For those souls, the arrival of the portals signified further disruption of their lives. A few of them would use these events to boost themselves out of the third-density spiral of destruction and onto the fourth-density path of redemption. They would come flowing gently into the new Earth and be welcomed by the intentional communities that now numbered well over 10,000.